Hey everybody, welcome back to the Daily News Roundup.
Glad to be here.
Are you ready to tackle this Tuesday with me?
Always.
It's January 14th, 2025, and the news today is, well, it's a real roller coaster. We've got political shakeups, fragile hopes for peace, and some pretty wild situations developing all over.
Yeah, it's a real reminder that even in our digital world, real-world events can still really catch us off guard.
Absolutely. So let's just dive right in with a story that's sending shockwaves through South Korea. President Yoon Suk-yeol has been arrested. I mean, talk about a bombshell.
Totally unexpected. And to make it even crazier, he was already impeached by their parliament.
Right, so he's technically still the president until the court makes a final decision. So this arrest just throws everything into even more chaos.
It's a huge mess.
And the scene itself sounds like something out of a movie. Investigators using ladders and wire cutters to get past barricades. Over 1,000 officers involved, supporters and protesters clashing outside his residence.
It really highlights the political turmoil that's gripping South Korea right now, and it makes you wonder, what does this mean for their future?
With the finance minister stepping in as acting president, everyone's holding their breath, waiting for the court's decision on Yoon's impeachment.
It's definitely a situation to watch.
Definitely. Now let's shift gears to the Middle East, where there's a glimmer of hope in the long and devastating conflict between Israel and Hamas. Reports are suggesting that a ceasefire deal might actually be on the horizon.
Imagine that 15 months of conflict potentially coming to an end. It's not just a temporary pause in the fighting. This could be a huge step towards building lasting peace in a region that's been marked by such deep historical tensions.
I mean, think about the human impact here. A teenager in Gaza who dreams of seeing her friend again, a young graduate longing for a future without the constant threat of violence, families in Israel desperately waiting for the return of their loved ones, some fearing the worst.
It's a stark reminder of the human cost of this conflict. Live shattered futures, uncertain. It's easy to get lost in the political back and forth. But these are real people whose lives have been completely upended.
Absolutely. So how would this ceasefire even work?
The reports outline a three-stage process, starting with a prisoner exchange, then a gradual withdrawal of Israeli troops, and finally the monumental task of rebuilding Gaza.
It sounds incredibly complex.
It is. And we have to remember there's a long history of broken promises and failed ceasefires in this region. The distrust on both sides is immense. Even the smallest spark could reignite the conflict.
It's a delicate situation, to say the least. Even if the ceasefire holds, the road to lasting peace will be long and difficult.
It's a situation that deserves our attention and careful consideration.
For sure. Now, speaking of delicate situations, NATO's got their hands full in the Baltic Sea. They're launching a new mission called Baltic Sentry to protect those vital undersea cables that were mysteriously damaged last year.
We're talking increased surveillance patrol, aircraft warships, drones. They're taking this very seriously.
It might seem strange to get so worked up over some cables, but these are not your average wires.
Exactly. We're talking about cables that carry over 95% of global internet traffic. Not to mention trillions of dollars in financial transactions every single day if they go down. It's not just an inconvenience, it's a global economic disaster waiting to happen.
And of course, the big question is who's responsible for the damage? No one's pointing fingers directly, but tensions with Russia are already at a boiling point.
This definitely isn't helping. It's a clear message that NATO is ready to defend critical infrastructure and stand up to any potential threats.
Now let's turn to a story that's just heartbreaking. We're hearing from survivors of that tragic dive boat disaster in the Red Sea.
It's terrible what happened.
They're alleging serious safety failings on board the Sea Story and a possible cover-up by Egyptian authorities.
Their accounts are chilling, to say the least. Imagine being trapped in darkness as the boat sinks, struggling to escape, then facing a lack of supplies and the life rafts. They were left waiting for rescue, feeling completely abandoned.
And to make matters worse, some survivors say they were pressured into signing witness statements in Arabic, a language they don't even understand.
It's a deeply disturbing situation. It raises serious questions about the investigation and the potential for a cover-up.
Especially since there's evidence pointing towards crew error or problems with the boat itself, despite initial reports blaming a rogue wave.
It's a complicated situation, but a thorough and independent investigation is crucial. We need to get to the bottom of what really happened to prevent future tragedies.
Absolutely. And tragically, a British couple, Jenny Cawson and Tariq Sanada, are still missing. Their friends and family are understandably frustrated by the lack of information and what they see as a lack of transparency from the Egyptian authorities.
It's a heartbreaking situation, and our thoughts are with their loved ones.
Now let's move from the depths of the sea to the world of tech. Meta, The parent company of Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp is making headlines with news of major job cuts.
It's not entirely surprising, though. We've been seeing this trend across the tech sector. Companies are facing some economic headwinds, and they're having to adapt.
Zuckerberg Meta's CEO says they need to move out low performers faster because a tough year is ahead. They're cutting a full 5% of their workforce, which means around 3,600 jobs will be lost.
And it's interesting to consider this move alongside Meta's other recent decisions, like ending their fact-checking program and shifting their focus to cost-cutting.
Even Zuckerberg's comments about needing more masculine energy in the company seem to suggest a change in priorities.
It feels like he's trying to reshape Meta's image and direction. Whether it'll work remains to be seen.
Some see it as a necessary adaptation to a changing market, while others are concerned about the impact on the company's culture and values.
It's definitely a story worth following. The tech landscape is constantly evolving, and Meta's decisions could have ripple effects throughout the entire industry.
Speaking of tech giants making waves, Elon Musk is back in the spotlight, and not for good reasons. He's facing another lawsuit from the SEC.
This time, they're suing him for failing to disclose his stake in Twitter when he started buying up shares back in 2022.
Which, of course, allowed him to buy those shares at a lower price, saving himself a fortune.
Exactly. And the SEC says he violated federal securities law by waiting 21 days to disclose his 5% ownership when he was supposed to do it within 10 days.
And Musk, being Musk, is firing back, calling the SEC totally broken and accusing them of harassment.
Classic Elon. This lawsuit is just the latest chapter in his ongoing saga. With regulators, remember his funding-secured tweet about Tesla that got him into so much trouble.
Oh yeah, that led to him stepping down as Tesla's chairman and paying a hefty fine.
This new lawsuit just adds another layer of complexity to his relationship with the authorities, and with Musk's personality, it's sure to be a wild ride.
Now for some news closer to home over in Los Angeles, authorities are cracking down on looting, especially after those devastating wildfires. The district attorney even released footage of a recent incident to show just how serious the consequences can be.
It's a clear message that they're not tolerating any lawlessness, especially while the city is still recovering from the fires.
And the DA is making it crystal clear. Looting could land you a very long time behind bars. They're pointing to California's 3 strikes law, which means repeat offenders could face 25 years to life in prison.
It's a controversial law, for sure. Some argue it's too harsh and disproportionately affects certain communities. But in this case, the DA is using it as a deterrent, hoping to prevent further crime at a time when the city is incredibly vulnerable.
It's a tough balance, trying to maintain public safety while ensuring fairness in the justice system, a debate that's going to continue for a long time.
Now, switching gears to foreign policy, President Biden is making a significant move regarding Cuba. He's taking them off the state sponsors of terrorism list.
This is part of a prisoner exchange deal that could see hundreds of Cubans freed. It's a major reversal of one of Trump's last-minute decisions before leaving office.
And it signals a potential shift in U.S.-Cuba relations.
It's important to remember why Cuba ended up on that list in the first place. Trump put them there for supporting Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela as part of his strategy to isolate the Maduro regime.
Right. And removing Cuba from the list could be a game changer for their economy. It could open up opportunities for trade and investment.
But there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding this decision. Trump could easily put Cuba back on the list if he returns to office, and his pick for Secretary of State Marco Rubio is a fierce critic of the Cuban government.
It just goes to show how quickly foreign policy can change depending on who's in charge. We'll have to wait and see how this plays out.
Definitely. Now, from the political arena to the world of culture, we have some sad news. The archive of the legendary composer Arnold Schoenberg has been destroyed in the LA wildfires.
A terrible loss, over 100,000 scores gone. This was the collection that orchestras and musicians around the world rented from to perform his work.
It's a devastating blow to the music world. Schoenberg was a true pioneer, a revolutionary composer who pushed the boundaries of music with his work on atonality and the 12-tone technique.
His compositions influenced generations of musicians and are considered cornerstones of 20th century music.
To think that those physical copies are gone forever, it's heartbreaking.
It is, but there's a glimmer of hope. Schoenberg's family is planning to create digital copies of the scores. It's a reminder that even in the face of such a tragic loss, the power of art and the determination to preserve cultural heritage can prevail.
It's a great thought and a good place to pause. For now, we've covered a lot of ground already, but there's still so much more to unpack. Stick with us. We'll be back in a moment with even more news from around the globe.
Looking forward to it. Welcome back to the show, folks. We're going to pick up with a story that really shines a light on the challenges of protecting civilians in war zones. A recent analysis by Brain Candy Verify found that the so-called humanitarian zone set up by Israel in Gaza has been hit at least 97 times since May.
That's a deeply troubling statistic.
Hmm.
This is a zone that Israel designated as a safe area for Palestinian civilians, even urging them to go there for protection.
And yet the analysis suggests that attacks in this zone have actually increased, with at least 22 strikes documented just this month alone.
Local media are reporting that over 550 people have been killed in these 97 strikes.
Now, it's important to note that Brain Candy Verify can't definitively confirm that every single one of these incidents was an Israeli attack.
Right?
While the Israeli military has acknowledged some of the strikes, they haven't confirmed involvement in all of them.
Still, the evidence is incredibly worrying. Residents in the zone report almost daily bombardments, often resulting in casualties. They're living in constant fear, their sense of security completely shattered.
Brain Candy Verify has reviewed hundreds of videos and photos from the zone showing the devastating aftermath of these strikes: collapsed buildings, destroyed tents, burned out cars, and tragically people being pulled from the rubble, some lifeless, others with horrific injuries.
The Israeli Defense Forces say they're targeting Hamas fighters who were operating within the zone. They accuse Hamas of using civilians as human shields.
But with so many strikes and reports of such high civilian casualties, it's hard not to question the proportionality and even the legality of these actions.
It raises serious concerns about the effectiveness and ethics of establishing these so-called safe zones in active conflict areas.
The UN and other humanitarian organizations have consistently warned that a unilaterally enforced safe zone is essentially an illusion in a conflict zone like Gaza.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
No easy answers at all.
This situation just underscores the urgent need for better protection of civilians caught in the crossfire, designating a humanitarian zone. Can't just be a symbolic gesture. There needs to be real action taken to actually guarantee the safety of those seeking refuge within its boundaries.
Absolutely. Shifting gears now, let's talk about health. A group of international experts is calling for a rethink of how we define obesity. They argue that relying solely on body mass index, or BMI, is just too simplistic and doesn't accurately reflect the complexities of obesity.
Yeah, it makes sense. BMI only considers your height and weight. It doesn't factor in other important things like muscle mass, how your body fat is distributed, or your overall health.
Exactly. These experts are proposing a new model that distinguishes between clinical obesity and preclinical obesity.
So what's the difference?
Well, clinical obesity would apply to people who have developed chronic illnesses as a direct result of their weight, things like heart disease, diabetes, or joint problems. These are the folks who would need more intensive treatment, potentially including medication or even surgery.
And what about people who are overweight or obese but haven't developed any weight-related health problems yet?
That's where preclinical obesity comes. In this group, according to the experts, should focus more on lifestyle changes, counseling, and regular monitoring to prevent future health issues.
It sounds like a more personalized approach to dealing with obesity, recognizing that it's not a one-size-fits-all issue.
Precisely. The report argues that this shift could lead to more tailored care, making sure that people get the right treatment based on their individual needs and risk factors.
Let's move on to Andrew Tate, the controversial internet personality who's been making headlines for quite a while now. He's been released from house arrest in Romania, but his legal troubles aren't over yet.
Right. He's still awaiting the outcome of that criminal investigation. He's facing some serious charges along with his brother Tristan, human trafficking, rape, and forming an organized crime group.
He's become such a polarizing figure, especially online. Millions of followers, mainly young men, drawn to his views on masculinity and his extravagant lifestyle.
And despite the severity of the accusations against him, Tate has maintained his innocence throughout the legal process. He even claims he's the victim of some sort of elaborate smear campaign.
So even though he's out of house arrest, he's not exactly a free man, right?
Not really. He's still under judicial control. He can travel within Romania, but he has to follow certain conditions set by the court.
This is definitely a story that's going to continue to unfold. Tate remains a controversial figure, and the outcome of this case could have significant implications both legally and culturally.
Speaking of legal battles, Elon Musk is in the hot seat again, this time with the SEC.
What do you do this time?
They're suing him, alleging he didn't disclose his stake in Twitter properly when he started buying shares back in 2022.
Which, as we know, saved him a ton of money.
Yeah, according to the SEC, this let Musk buy shares at a lower price, potentially saving him millions.
So what exactly did he do wrong?
The SEC claims that he violated federal securities law by waiting 21 days to disclose that he owned 5% of Twitter. He was supposed to do it within 10 days. They're saying this delay gave him an unfair advantage.
Predictably, Musk is fighting back, calling the SEC totally broken and accusing them of harassment.
It's almost like a broken record at this point.
This lawsuit is just another chapter in Musk's ongoing saga with regulators. Remember the whole funding secured tweet about Tesla?
Oh yeah, that was a big one. He ended up having to step down as Tesla's chairman and pay a massive fine. This new lawsuit just adds more fuel to the fire. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out, especially with Musk's unpredictable nature.
Switching gears to U.S.-Cuba relations, President Biden has announced that he's going to remove Cuba from the U.S. state sponsors of terrorism list.
This is a big development. This designation, which Trump brought back in 2021, has had a huge impact on Cuba, both economically and diplomatically.
And this decision is part of a prisoner exchange that could see hundreds of Cuban prisoners released, including some who were involved in those anti-government protests.
It's a potential turning point in U.S.-Cuba relations, a step towards normalization. It could open up more opportunities for dialogue and cooperation.
Are there any potential roadblocks that we should be aware of?
Well, there's still a lot of uncertainty. Trump, who might return to the White House, could reverse this decision. His nominee for Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is a very vocal critic of the Cuban government. So it's a wait-and-see situation, but for now, it's a hopeful sign for improved relations.
Now back to the aftermath of those devastating wildfires in Los Angeles. The cultural world is reeling from a huge loss.
It's a tragedy. The archive of the renowned composer Arnold Schoenberg was completely destroyed in the fire last week.
This was housed in the Pacific Palisades, right?
Yeah, over 100,000 scores gone. This was the main source for orchestras and musicians all over the world who wanted to perform his work.
Schoenberg was a truly revolutionary figure in music. His pioneering work on atonality and the 12-tone technique influenced so many musicians. His compositions are essential to 20th century music.
The loss of these physical copies is just devastating. They represented his creative genius, his legacy.
It's a cultural loss that's difficult to measure.
It really is, but there is a glimmer of hope. Schoenberg's family is planning to create digital copies of those scores. It's a wonderful act of resilience, ensuring that his music lives on it. Reminds us that even in the face of tragedy, art can endure.
Absolutely. Now, from a cultural loss to a potential economic shift over in Spain, the Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has announced a bold and somewhat controversial plan to address what he calls the country's housing emergency.
He's proposing a new tax on property purchases by non-residents, specifically those from outside the European Union.
Wow, how high are we talking?
Yeah. It could reach up to 100% of the property's value. It's designed to make more homes available for Spanish citizens and to curb what Sanchez sees as speculation by foreign buyers driving up prices.
This is a bold move. What's the reaction been like?
It's been mixed. Supporters say it's necessary to protect affordability for Spanish citizens. They argue that foreign buyers, especially in tourist areas, have been pushing locals out of the market.
But what about the potential downsides?
Critics are worried. They say this tax could scare away foreign investment and damage the real estate market. They argue that foreign buyers play a vital role in the Spanish economy, and this could backfire.
It's a complex issue with far-reaching consequences. We'll have to watch and see how this plays out.
Now to the tragic situation in Sudan, where the civil war continues to inflict a terrible toll on civilians. The latest reports say over 120 people have been killed in shelling in Omdurman.
Omdurman is just across the Nile from the capital Khartoum, isn't it?
Yeah. That's right. This latest incident is a grim reminder of the brutal reality of this conflict, which has been raging for 21 months now. It's causing mass displacement, immense suffering, and pushing the country towards famine.
It's heartbreaking. Do we know who's responsible for this attack?
The Ambata Emergency Response Room, a local volunteer network, says that these deaths were caused by indiscriminate shelling of a residential area. They haven't said which side is responsible, but it shows the extreme dangers faced by civilians.
This conflict has been dragging on for so long, and there's no end in sight.
It's a desperate situation. Medical supplies are running low, healthcare workers are overwhelmed. The humanitarian crisis is worsening every day.
The international community needs to step up its efforts to find a peaceful resolution and provide urgent humanitarian aid. The situation in Sudan demands immediate attention.
Now let's go to South Africa, where a rescue operation at an abandoned gold mine has taken a tragic turn. Rescuers have been pulling both survivors and body bags from a mine shaft in Stilfontein, where a group of illegal miners were trapped.
These are the miners known as Zamazamas, right?
Yeah, these are miners who work in incredibly dangerous conditions, often deadly. They're driven by poverty and unemployment, risking their lives to get gold from these abandoned mines, often without proper equipment or safety measures.
Do we know how many people were trapped?
The exact number is still unclear, but so far 82 miners have been rescued, but tragically 36 bodies have been recovered.
It's a stark reminder of the risks these miners face every single day.
The situation has sparked protests from relatives and community members who are demanding accountability and faster action from the authorities. They're understandably angry and grieving and want answers.
The government's been criticized for its tough stance on illegal mining. Some even say they blocked food and water from reaching the trapped miners.
This incident highlights the deep complexities in South Africa. Poverty and inequality force people into desperate measures.
And it shows the dangers of unregulated mining and the urgent need for solutions that address both the economic desperation and the safety concerns.
Let's move on to a story that sheds light on the psychological tactics being used in the war between Russia and Ukraine. It's a disturbing account of how Russia is allegedly targeting the families of Ukrainian prisoners of war, trying to pressure them into acts of sabotage or espionage.
That's awful. Do you have any examples?
We spoke to a woman named Svetlana, whose husband Dima, a medic in the Ukrainian army, was captured by Russian forces. She told us she was contacted by a man claiming to be a Russian agent.
What did he want?
He offered Svetlana a deal. He said that if she committed acts of sabotage against Ukraine, things like setting fire to a military enlistment office or revealing the locations of air defense units, her husband would be treated better in prison or even released early.
What a horrific situation to be put in. What did she do?
Svetlana followed instructions from the Ukrainian authorities. She recorded her conversations with the agent and reported them to the Security Service of Ukraine, the SBU. She pretended to agree to those acts while the SBU investigated.
That must have been terrifying for her.
Absolutely. And when she eventually backed out, the threats started, the agent told her that her husband would be tortured and killed.
It's hard to believe they would resort to such tactics. What happened to her husband?
Svetlana's story, thankfully, has a happy ending. Her husband was eventually released in a prisoner exchange. He told her that the Russians never actually acted on their threats, but her experience highlights the lengths to which Russia is willing to go to exploit the desperation of families whose loved ones are captive.
It's a cruel and cynical tactic. Are there other cases like this?
The SBU has confirmed that this is a widespread tactic. They estimate that around 50% of the families of Ukrainian POWs have been contacted by Russian agents with similar offers and threats.
It's a reminder that this war isn't just being fought on the battlefield.
It's being waged in the shadows, using psychological manipulation and exploiting the love and vulnerability of families.
The Ukrainian authorities are urging anyone who's been contacted by Russian agents to report it immediately. They're assuring people that they'll be protected and treated as victims.
They're also emphasizing that cooperating with these requests won't help their loved ones and could actually put them in even more danger.
It's a stark reminder that the battle lines in this conflict extend far beyond the physical front.
This is a war that's being fought on multiple fronts, including the psychological realm, where fear, manipulation, and desperation are weapons. We'll continue to follow this story closely as it develops, but for now, let's take a quick break. We'll be back with the final part of our news roundup shortly.
We're back for the final stretch of our news roundup, and for something truly remarkable, we're heading over to India.
You're talking about the Mahakumbh Mela, right?
Yeah, the world's largest religious gathering, an incredible display of faith and devotion.
Millions upon millions of people gathering every 12 years, united in their pursuit of spiritual enlightenment.
It's hard to even grasp the scale of it. They immerse themselves in the icy waters of the Ganges River, a ritual believed to cleanse them of their sins and bring them closer to the divine.
I bet the atmosphere there is electric, a powerful sense of shared purpose.
Absolutely. Over 400 million visitors are expected over the next 6 weeks. It's a logistical and cultural phenomenon unlike any other.
It really speaks to the enduring power of religion and spirituality, the human need for connection and shared rituals in a world that can often feel so chaotic.
Now, from a display of faith to a reckoning with political history, a newly released report is shedding light on the investigations into Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election.
This report, authored by Special Counsel Jack Smith, reveals that Trump would have likely faced conviction if he hadn't been reelected in 2024.
It's a reminder that the Constitution prevents the prosecution of a sitting president, which is why the case against Trump was ultimately dismissed. But this report lays out the evidence detailing what Smith calls Trump's unprecedented efforts to unlawfully retain power.
The report accuses Trump of pressuring officials, spreading false claims of election fraud, even exploiting the January 6th Capitol riot, all in an attempt to cling to power.
And as expected, Trump has denied any wrongdoing, calling the report fake and Smith deranged.
Of course. But this report raises important questions about accountability and the consequences of unchecked power. It's a reminder of how fragile our democratic institutions are and the importance of upholding the rule of law.
Absolutely. Now let's end on a positive note. We've talked about the devastating wildfires in Los Angeles, but amidst the destruction, there are stories of resilience and community spirit. The Los Angeles Equestrian Center has become a safe haven for hundreds of animals displaced by the fires.
It's heartwarming to see horses, donkeys, pigs, even miniature horses, all finding refuge and care.
So many of them lost their homes when their stables or farms were destroyed or threatened by the flames.
And the center, with the help of amazing volunteers, is providing shelter, food, and medical care to these animals.
It's a testament to the compassion and generosity of people coming together to care for those in need, both human and animal.
A reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's always hope and kindness.
And on that note, that wraps up our news roundup for today. It's been a day of highs and lows, from political turmoil to glimmers of hope, from tragedy to inspiring acts of resilience.
It reminds us that the world is a complex and constantly changing place, and staying informed and engaged is crucial.
We'll be back tomorrow with more news from around the globe. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and take care.
See you then, everyone.